I hope you're having a good time. My name is Bernadette. I'm the international officer at the Human Rights Institute, University of Isfahan. We are really pleased to have you here, and I'm personally very happy that you accepted our invitation to join this interview, because we all know that we are in a very hectic situation right now in terms of war and conflict. Both Lebanon and Iran are suffering and witnessing a huge damages to the humanitarian infrastructures, to human rights, and other humanitarian related aspects. And I'm also very sorry for your losses of your friends or relatives back to Lebanon, and I hope you can recover very soon. Personally speaking, I can really relate to what you have experienced, because we are also experiencing the same aspect of war, which is very dangerous, very affecting human lives. So I'm really appreciating your presence here. It really means a lot to us. Let me just introduce yourself to our audiences, because we're going to publish and put the interview online in our YouTube channel. Bernadette Zaydan is a human rights advocate and a legal professional known for her work on international justice, accountability, and the protection of fundamental rights, especially in conflict-affected contexts. I want to start first with the broader legal aspect. So from a legal perspective, how should we assess the legality of the US-Israeli war against both Iran and Lebanon, and the use of force against these two countries that I mentioned, particularly mentioning to the UN Charter, Article 2.4, how we should assess the legality of the use of force?
Oh, thank you. That's a really important question to start off with. And thank you for including Lebanon, because although Lebanon is a smaller player in the region, what we are seeing is quite a unique battle happening, and we'll probably talk about that later on. So thank you for including Lebanon in your question. Look, to assess the lawfulness of the US and Israeli strikes on Iran and Lebanon to some extent, we really have to look at the evidence, and we have to look at the history of the parties, because the parties have been essentially at war for quite a while. We know that Iran has been sanctioned by the United States for decades. So the evidence that I'm talking about, to answer your question, is really about Israel launching the first strike on Tehran, and when it launched it on the weekend. It launched it during Ramadan, the fasting month, and that wasn't it. Then it was followed by the US launching its own strikes in Operation Epic Fury. We are told a few reasons why these strikes were launched, and quite frankly, the reasons are confusing and contradictory. But as you have pointed out, if we look at the law, essentially Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, all its members must refrain from using force against another country. And there are two exceptions. The first one is self-defense, and this is really important in the context of what's going on. So self-defense is under Article 51 of the UN Charter, and it says that people, individuals, as well as the state, has a right to self-defense. But the caveat to that is it's only allowed to defend itself if there was an armed attack against it. And the second exception is it's in Chapter 7, where the Security Council will authorize for you to defend yourself. So we saw that neither the US or Israel invoked Article 21, and no credible evidence was put to the people, let alone to other governments, that there was an armed attack by Iran against the US or Israel. We heard a lot of rhetoric, and one of the things that we heard is that it was a preemptive strike on Iran, and there is no lawfulness to a preemptive strike. You can't just strike a country. That is not self-defense under Article 51. But then we heard that, the rhetoric that Iran is sponsoring and supporting terrorists, being Hezbollah in Iraq and Lebanon. And so that became an excuse for a preemptive strike. But again, that is not, the law does not permit that. And I also want to raise something really important about using the excuse of resistance groups or terrorists, as the West will call them. Now, these groups are not state actors, so Iran cannot be responsible for these groups. Their actions are their actions, and we need to be clear about that. Their action, even if Iran is supporting them by supplying them intelligence or supplying them with missiles, that does not make their actions Iran's actions. What I would say is, under international law, there is a right of people to self-determination and self-defense. Now, arguably, that's where the resistance groups fall into that category. And given that they have this right to defend themselves, defend their territory, then I would argue that the preemptive strike justification for going to war is, it's not satisfied. Preemptive strike just does not allow countries to break the law, and that's essentially what we had.
Mm-hmm. And I think the distinction between legal justification and political framing is really important here, because as you also mentioned, the UN Charter established a kind of near absolute prohibition of the use of force, and it's restricted to the so-called self-defense, and also the Security Council authorization needs to be in place in order to take some form of military actions. But as you mentioned very vividly, we didn't observe any imminent threats by either Iran or Lebanon. And that's why it's very important to distinguish between political framing and the legal justification. Moving to the, yeah.
It's just on that, that's a really important point to make. Just on that, what we do know, though, historically, is that the US and the United States have used all sorts of excuses to try and strike Iran. They've used the excuses of its missiles. So these are things that have come out of, the playbook of the US going to war with Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. We have heard the same excuses over and over again, but those political justifications, they can amount to war crimes. So we lawyers need to take a really careful look at these political justifications, because they are not excusable.
And do you see the recent actions in Iran and Lebanon as part of a broader trend toward expanding the doctrine of self-defense beyond its traditionally accepted limits? Do you see these trends right now?
I don't. what I see happening in Iran and in Lebanon, I mean, I see what you mean in terms of one side is trying to broaden the definition of self-defense to include things like Iran poses an imminent threat, and Iran may have a nuclear bomb by a set date. That's not how the law works, and you can't broaden a doctrine to include acts that are unlawful under international law. So if a country poses a threat, it's like a preemptive strike. You can't just go and take military action against it, because it may act and may do something that would become a threat. So yeah, again, to me, that is also falling into the category of you cannot broaden a definition, and you cannot potentially what you are doing, and what the US and Israel are doing, is they are taking part in action that is prohibited under international law. And potentially what they're doing is war crimes, and this evidence would be reviewed and should be reviewed by lawyers. And I know what's going on in Lebanon. People call it ethnic cleansing, and there's all sorts of categorization of Israel's actions. But I would go one step further, and I've had a look at the evidence over the past few years, and I would say that there's genocidal intent in Lebanon, and self-defense falls away. No, you can't even bring up the self-defense argument when there is accusation that Israel is committing genocide.
Mm-hmm. That was a very thoughtful answer. And may I add also that especially during Trump presidency and Netanyahu ruling in Israel, we are, as you mentioned, they don't even bother to refer to international law to make excuses to justify their actions. They just do it. They don't care about international law in its nature. And I think the point that you mentioned can really relate.
And those tweets are really powerful. Those tweets serve as evidence. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why I brought up genocidal intent. It's what they're saying and what they're doing. So what they're saying is followed by what they're doing. And so these acts are deliberate, and they are inflicting conditions of life, which is to bring about a group physical destruction. And we know in South Lebanon, there is a lot of destruction. Some people just cannot return to their homes. We know that white phosphorus has been used. We know that more than 1.2 million Lebanese are displaced. We know that the schools, the churches, the mosques, they have all been targeted, and it's all deliberate. And so what they say, what Trump and what the Israelis are saying in their tweets and in social media posts also dismiss any argument of self-defense. Self-defense, you can't justify it when you have the actions that I've just listed. So look, their tweets may seem very silly, and it may be causing uproar, or it may be manipulating the markets in the United States. But ultimately, these are really powerful pieces of evidence.
Yeah, and we have reached to my third question, which is about the damages inflicted upon the civilian infrastructures. So alongside the use of force, we are, as you mentioned, we are observing critical threats and normalization of threats and attacks against civilian infrastructures, those ordinary infrastructures that people use in their day-to-day life, such as bridges, power systems, public utilities. We are witnessing that political leaders inside the United States and Israel publicly threat that they are going to attack these facilities. So my question is, when political leaders openly threaten to target bridges, power plants, whatever you call it, does that in itself raise legal concerns under international humanitarian law even before such attacks even occur?
Absolutely, yeah. Look, from the outset, let's be clear, all civilian infrastructure is vulnerable in time of war. When we, they're essential services that we require for our survival, especially water. And things like, power grids, bridges, schools, water systems, places of worship, they're all protected under law. We know that Article 48 and Article 51 of the additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions, they protect civilian infrastructure. There's no exception. And you cannot claim that it's fair game. You have to preserve the infrastructure. But unfortunately, what we are seeing is they are very much targeted by the United States. It's part of their strategy, and Israel. And we saw that in Gaza. We actually saw this in Iraq as well. We saw the waterways was always a target. So this isn't new. And we also have to make it clear that the law prohibits acts of threats of violence on these infrastructure. So not only does the law prohibit the targeting and the destruction of the infrastructure, but it also does not accept and prohibits threats of violence. Because what that does, it spreads terror among the people, among the civilian population. And what it does, it displaces people. A lot of people, let's say South Lebanon, for example, and forgive me, I'll only use examples of Lebanon because that's my birthplace and I know Lebanon quite well. I can't give you examples of Iran the way I can give you examples of Lebanon. But Israel was quite strategic. What it's done is it's targeted farmlands, very fertile land, which is in South Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley. Those two areas of Lebanon supply a lot of the food that feed the people. And that land, especially parts of South Lebanon, you cannot grow anything because my understanding is there's been all sorts of chemical sprays, there's been all sorts of, white phosphorus, potentially landmines. So that's quite strategic. So what we have here is terrorizing of a civilian population.
Yeah, thank you very much for your remark. One of the main arguments that the aggressors put forward is the concept of dual-use military target. So they claim that we are attacking this particular space or area because it has a dual-use function. I want to ask a very specific and expertise question, as you are a very renowned lawyer. How should lawyers critically evaluate claims that infrastructures in Lebanon and Iran constitute a legitimate dual-use military target? How should lawyers somehow challenge this dual-use claim?
So by now we have seen lawyers and non-lawyers, we have seen the pattern. And we have seen the language, the rhetoric, and, like preemptive strikes, dual use, all of that in the context of law, of war is not, it's political. So there is no justification, because what you are doing is you are, at the end of the day, harming and bringing punishment to the civilians. Like I said, you have civilians who can't return back to their land. Forget about their homes. They don't have homes, but they may put up a tent, or they may, make do in terms of shelter. But the fact is, the actual land itself that feeds them, the waterways that allows them to feed themselves, are damaged. We have heard time and time again that Al Shifa Hospital was Hamas. Hamas had weapons there. We've heard the same rhetoric, dual use, about hospitals in Lebanon. We hear the same language, the same pattern over and over again. But let's be clear, we all see through that. And lawyers do see through that and have seen through that. But under international law, you need to look at the use and the infrastructure itself. What I also hear from Israel is that, but there's potential use, just like they say, the children will potentially grow up to become terrorists. So these justifications are not accepted under international law. So we need to look at the current use of the infrastructure, and what is it contributing to? Is it contributing to military action? For example, is a power plant powering a military base, or is it powering hospitals or homes? So we need to look at its use. In the terms of South Lebanon, a lot of people left the area. They received evacuation notices, they left the area. And so what we are told by Israel is that there's justification in leveling out the cities and the villages. But at the same time, they've come out with rhetoric saying that we will turn parts of Lebanon into Gaza. So you have to look at the use, you have to look at the rhetoric, and you have to base the lawfulness on those two things. Look, can things be used by civilians and by the military? Perhaps. Airports, maybe. But we know from the United States, they have a lot of bases around West Asia. So we also know that, and this is through intelligence, that Israel has military components in Tel Aviv, in a densely populated area. So we have to be careful what we are being told, and we have to look at the evidence, and we have to look at the use, and we have to look at the rhetoric. And then we have to look at, is it proportional? Like, is the attack that's been mounted on this infrastructure, is it acceptable given its use? So when we see and we hear that there are tunnels, and the Hamas tunnels under Shifa Hospital, and we need to bomb the hospital, well, do you really need to level the whole thing? We know that they have precision bombing. So that's the other thing we need to look at. But at the end of the day, you need to assess what harm has been brought to the civilian population. We also have to look at, has this alleged dual use assessment caused loss of water, electricity, oxygen in hospitals, and was it excessive? So we see through the dual use argument. It's not as simple as Israel and the United States will have you believe.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like Netanyahu claim of dual use is really insane because he keep doing everything he wants and he blames the other part, the other side, that you are using a dual use facility here, we bomb it, we destroy it. And as you mentioned, everything can be used in a two-sided way. For example, food can be consumed by both military personnel and also ordinary people. So doesn't make sense to pursue such a claim. My next question is about the responsibility under states. So when such cascading humanitarian consequences are predictable, how should responsibility be framed under international law?
Oh, yes. So, this is quite difficult to answer. Unfortunately, we are seeing a huge humanitarian cost to these wars that have been spreading across West Asia. What I would say is that we need to ensure there's individual criminal liability for those who are ordering or carrying out the attacks. We know that there are arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. These have not been enforced. And this is a huge problem because, we need to set a precedent when civilians are suffering, when civilians cannot return back to their land because their land is poisoned, then international law should be able to step in and should be able to hold those responsible to account. Now, we also need to ensure that states are held to account for violations of international law. And what we are seeing at the moment are really serious violations of international law. But again, we live in a time that's it's quite unusual. I mean, we have the United States government that has gone into Venezuela and abducted and detained the head of the country, and nothing has been said. International law has not been able to prevent them, and then they've gone on to do things that are even wilder by potentially now committing genocide in Lebanon. How we hold individuals and states to account in the context of this war and the wars of tomorrow is something that needs to be addressed. We need accountability, and we don't need accountability tomorrow. We need it right now. But I think that's a discussion for another day, the failings of international law.
I completely agree. And I may add to that the fact that some states like the United States and Israel breach international law very publicly, very vividly, it would lead to the violation of international law by other states as well. So other states would see the pattern, would observe the limitation of international law, would see that only power works, as they say, and they would also start to breach international law based on their national interests or whatever they want. So that's a very dangerous pattern, I would say, and it needs a lot of responsibility by sovereign states to step up and to claim for international law, to advocate international law, to encourage one another to obey and comply with international law.
Yeah, look, enforceability is a huge problem. And in my lifetime, I've witnessed many genocides, and we should not be witnessing genocides. Genocide should not be occurring. We have laws that prevent it. We have laws that require member states to prevent and to take proactive measures to stop genocides. It just isn't working. And there needs to be a review of enforceability. In Lebanon, for example, we have UNIFIL, which is part of the United Nations, that used to go there and be peacekeepers, so-called peacekeepers. But if you speak to the Lebanese, they tell you they're not peacekeepers. They are there to serve the interests of the United States, which has veto power. So all of that needs to be reviewed, and there needs to be a balance. And quite frankly, these are really hard times, but we also, as lawyers around the world, we all need to try and use this as an opportunity to bring about tangible change, to bring about reform in enforcement mechanisms. At the moment, you have the International Criminal Court, where the United States can sanction individuals, and things aren't working. And if we are serious about international law, then we have to reform it.
Mm-hmm.
The enforceability component, at least.
Yeah, that was a good point. The next question is about the concept that you already have mentioned, which is the concept of proportionality, a very important term in international law. As you know, the principle of distinction, proportionality, and precaution remain the core operational rules of international humanitarian law and international law, but yet their application in modern conflict, especially the war involving modern technologies and AI, and also complex targets, appears increasingly contested. And we are witnessing the war against Iran and Lebanon, that the concept of proportionality and precaution is very obscure, is very not clear what is happening, very important to be informed what is being happening. So how should the principle of proportionality be applied when multiple attacks taken together produce sustained humanitarian harm?
I think by now the United States and Israel have made it clear that they do not conduct proportionality assessments. They simply proceed with the kill. The fact that they bombed a school in Iran, knowing that there are children in the school, the fact that they waged a war on a nation of Muslims when they're fasting in the holy month of Ramadan, they have no regard for that principle of proportionality whatsoever. I do not personally and legally, I do not see that they consider whether their acts will, how many civilians will die. They don't care. They just simply don't care. And we know that. They even bombed a synagogue in Iran. And the issue about the actions taken by Israel and the United States, these actions are deliberate. They target infrastructure, schools, synagogues, while people are in those buildings, when they know they are going to harm and not just destroy the building, but they are going to kill kids in that building, in that school. So there's no proportionality. And I do want to point out that this was also an important issue that the South African lawyers raised in the genocide case against Israel before the International Court of Justice. And I have no doubt, if lawyers bring action against Israel and America for the actions, for the war that they've conducted against Iran and Lebanon, that proportionality will be quite an important principle, and the evidence will be gathered to show that they have no regard for proportionality.
Yeah, I can really relate to what you have just mentioned, because we are witnessing a deliberate attack on civilian nature facilities that we know that these areas is based on people are living there. So hospitals, education facilities, all sorts of these things. And they attack deliberately to say that to incite fear, incite threats, and yeah.
That's really important. That's exactly right. And what we saw in Gaza, we are seeing now in South Lebanon. What we saw is, you know, the drones, they just terrorize people. But more worryingly is the drones are used to, you know, the drones are used to kill. And we talk about targeted, we talk about how people are just trying to escape, or they're trying to leave an area. They get evacuation notice, they try, but the drones are already out there. There is no room to move. And then sometimes those drones, what they're doing is, there are accounts where someone's crying out for help, and so medics will go to assist, and they end up being targeted and being killed. Now, that's not proportionality. That's intentional. That's a war crime. And you're absolutely right. It is used as a mechanism to terrorize, because they don't want the people back. This is how they think that they could take over the land. It is to terrorize people to the point where they don't want to come back.
Exactly.
So there's the mental warfare as well as the physical, and also the destruction of the land.
Yeah, just to hinder people support of their own country, to dispersuade them to support their own country, and to make them frustrated to what's been happening. Another
and worse,
yeah.
and worse, in Lebanon, they want a civil war. They love the idea of creating a civil war. So they will create tension between the different groups of people. They haven't succeeded, and we'll wait and see what happens on that front.
Yeah, exactly. One of the persistent challenge in the ongoing conflicts in Lebanon and Iran is the difficulty in documenting the violation in real time, especially where access is very limited. The narrative is being contested, and also the digital evidence is not present. So what practical mechanism should exist to ensure credible documentation of civilian harm in environments like Lebanon and Iran? How should we document the very damages inflicted upon civilian population?
Again, I'd refer back to the South African case against Israel in the ICJ, where the evidence that the South African lawyers relied on came from journalists and civilians on the ground in Gaza. They were incredibly powerful. They were credible because they were captured. The footage was captured and it was uploaded to social media. So there is a record of it being authentic and happening, being viewed as it happened. So this sort of evidence is incredibly important. We also use that evidence. If the matter goes to a court, we use it for to draft witness statements, and again, that's incredibly powerful. So we also, the other mechanism is witness statements from medics, from medical personnel. We know that we have, from around the world, we have amazing people who go and provide medical support in war zones, and their witness statements, the doctors, the medics, their witness statements are incredibly powerful and important. And so I can't stress enough how powerful a medical personnel's witness statement is, because they do document the civilian harm, and they also verify the environment that civilians are subjected to. So they could talk about, not just the bombing of a certain region, but they could talk about the harm that was brought about from certain bombs. So it gives us an idea of what sort of weapons were used. Are they weapons that are lawful? Are they weapons that have been banned under international law? And these do come from witness statements, and these are very important.
Yeah, and it's very sad to hear the news that Israel forces target those individuals who are having a very impactful and important role in mediating the conflict, in somehow giving treatment to people who are injured, and also they attacked many independent journalists from Middle Eastern countries, just to make sure that no credible and trustworthy news is being circulated around the world, and the world is watching what is really being happened. So it's very sad to hear such a news that independent medical workers, as you said, journalists, are being deliberately targeted in their homes, in their in their office, just to make sure that no one is left to circulate the real news.
I would go one step further. I would actually say that this is very deliberate, and this goes to genocidal intent. And what I would say is targeting these groups of people is an intent to bring about destruction of a group in part or in whole. So I think it's more sinister than we think, and it's no accident, and it's not a mistake that they are trying to erase the voices of those who are on the ground, who could show us what's going on, as well as tell us what's going on. They want to erase those voices. They also want to erase, they want to erase history. What I know in Lebanon, even in Beirut, they had bombed a building that had birth certificates, and it held all sorts of very important information about the civilians. To me, that's intentional. That's to erase the fact that these people exist, and you will end up having some people who on paper appear to be stateless because there are no papers and they can't prove their identity. So I think it's quite sinister and very deliberate, and it goes back to how is this war being conducted? And I would say it is being conducted in a very aggressive, unlawful way to just, to bring about mass destruction.
Yeah. And we can also refer to the killing of two Al-Mayadeen journalists just last week by the IDF. So it's very disappointing to hear such news. Going back to...
But it's not new, right? It's not new. We've seen this in Gaza. We have seen also the killing of aid workers. And this is all very deliberate. And again, it goes to trying to cause terror among the people. And it's also terror throughout the entire world. These sort of actions are designed, not just for that purpose, but for also creating terror.
And going back to your legal expertise, I want to know about the practical role that institutions, human rights institutions like us, can play in responding to humanitarian harm, whether it's in Lebanon or in Iran or in Gaza, as you said, and such similar conflict settings. What can human rights independent non-governmental institution play? What role can they play during this very dangerous and hectic situation?
Well, from a lawyer's perspective, I would encourage, organisations who are NGOs, for example, to bring legal action before either the domestic court or the ICC. We saw a complaint filed by a Lebanese artist, Ali Sherry, I think his name is. He brought a complaint because Israel is accused of violating international law by targeting civilian infrastructure that killed multiple people. Sorry, I can't remember how many, but it included both his parents. These sort of actions are incredibly important. We also need to put pressure on legal institutions so that they can pursue accountability. Accountability is what's missing from the law at the moment, or the main issue missing. And we need to pressure our governments, we need to pressure legal institutions to try and pursue accountability through the international courts. We need to bring more cases before the International Criminal Court. We need to bring, cases for repatriation. Iran is in a very strong position, and it's very cleverly raising money via tolls in the Strait of Hormuz, but some places like Lebanon cannot do that. So what I would say is there are legal mechanisms where you can bring action, civil action. And then there are organisations, NGOs, that can participate in investigation. The HRIUI Foundation, they do an amazing job. We can expand that. We can expand that to Lebanon. We can expand it to Iran. So there's a lot that can be done by organisations and legal institutions.
Thanks so much. From an ethical perspective, it's very important to touch on some elements of ethics and morality as well. What does the normalization of such patterns of harm mean for the future of credibility of international humanitarian law or international law? How should we assess the credibility of international law in 10 years?
Look, yeah. This is a really difficult one. I do say that the law should work. The law says civilians need to be protected, for example, and this is, a paramount consideration, and it tells us we do have laws and they should work. It's the structure and how it's been set up in terms of enforceability that is the issue. We can never accept this as normal, and we can't accept that this harm is going to continue happening forever. What we need to do is we need a universal legal system that has accountability built in, and we need to protect it from political elements, political interference, political interests. We need to get rid of, for example, the veto power that the United States enjoys. There are lots of things we can do, but it's just a matter of how do we separate the law from politics? I don't know the answer. And I don't think we can really give it much attention here because it's a big topic.
Yeah. Um, I feel like it's very difficult to distinguish between politics and international law, as many states would prefer their own national interests, would prefer to serve their own interests in their region, in the world. It's very difficult and hard to encourage them and limit them under international law when they have other form of interest and benefits that they can gain regardless of international law. So that's very important topic to have a thought about. My last question is referring to the work we are doing in HRIUI. We would really be happy if we can have collaboration with institutions in Australia, whether it's in the form of media collaboration or research collaboration. That would mean a lot, and as you said, NGOs and institutions can play an important role during these hard times. So is there any human rights related institution in Australia that is willing to engage in such a cooperation?
That's really interesting because Australia is going through a very difficult time in relation to free speech and protest rights and civil rights. At the moment, Australia is going through what I would say a lot of domestic turmoil. There is a move to try and outlaw any criticism of Israel. And that goes against the law. The law says that criticism of Israel is political and you are entitled to do so. There's that challenge. Then there's a challenge of Iran. Iran has been accused of terrorist acts, or at least a hand in terrorist acts in Australia. The ambassador was sent home. There is a lot of animosity towards Iran by the existing government. So I'm not quite sure how that's a political issue, and then that hurdle will need to be addressed. Then there's also our universities here. I have acted for many students who have been expelled or suspended because of their anti-war, anti-genocide position. And you would think that universities are the place to encourage young people to speak about human rights. These students have gone through, quite tough time, but we lawyers have been able to challenge the decisions and actions of the universities, and we have been quite successful. So that's also a hurdle. So for a university in Iran to collaborate with Australian institutions could be challenging. I won't be able to give you an answer of, which human rights groups you could collaborate with. But sure, the media, there are independent journalists who do really good work. And there's also, civil liberty groups that are doing excellent work in terms of the restrictive laws that have been passed. So look, there's potential, but there are hurdles.
And it's very sad to hear that Australia states is trying to silence other voices that is criticizing the actions of Israel or the United States. Because these states have voiced, have shown and portrayed themselves as the protector of human rights, as the protector of human dignity, as the enablers of free speech. But what we are witnessing today is that they try to hinder and stop any voices that try to challenge the main narrative. So let's hope that there is a bit better relationship between the government. I would say it shouldn't matter, because we want to have collaboration with non-governmental institutions. So why would it matter whether the relationship between our government is good or not? But anyway, that's the case, and I can really understand.
It's an important point.
Yeah.
That's an important point. Unfortunately for Iran, it has suffered years of sanctions and Australian foreign policy alliance with the United States. So you would expect that they would be very cautious about, and I'm talking about government, I'm not talking about human rights organizations. I mean, there may be some great opportunities, and I'm sure there are, but I do think that unfortunately at this time we do have an alignment with the United States.
Yeah. And thank you.
Which is causing a lot of internal issues,
Yeah.
by the way. Like, I don't know if you've heard, but in one of the cities of Australia, they have outlawed the chant "From the river to
Yeah.
the sea." You can get 2 years imprisonment and globalize the Intifada. Now, that's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And as you would know, Intifada is an Arab term for resistance, essentially. And they just don't like, I don't know, they just don't like our language, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Ms. Zaydan, for your participation in this interview. It was very thoughtful, very insightful for me to hear your comments, your remarks about what's been happening in the region, in Lebanon, in Iran.